What if you could make the changes in your life before you have to face a major health scare or wake up call? Welcome this morning to the Design Your Legacy podcast. My name is Angelina Carlton, and I'd like to welcome back the lovely Crista Grasso. She is a serial entrepreneur. She's also the founder and creator of the Lean Out Method. Welcome back, Crista.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be back and chatting with you again.
Yes, yes. So I'm just going to jump right on in because your story is more common than we'd like to realize. And sometimes we don't get to look behind the resume, behind the curtain, behind the LinkedIn profile to see the human being on the journey and kind of that transformative process that one goes through to really embrace life again. So I'm going to start with the first hard-hitting question, which is, what was it like to receive the news of cancer?
It was honestly a little shocking, right? I think no matter how much we can be prepared, obviously, the doctor told me that they found something wrong when I had my mammogram. I had a biopsy, right? So you always know that the result could be positive, but you never actually expect that it will. And even after they gave me the news, I still kept thinking they were going to call me back and say, just kidding. We were looking at someone else's results. It wasn't yours. And, my mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer. I went through the entire journey with her. So I always had this fear inside me that it was something that I might experience at some point. But she was also 20 years older than I was when she was diagnosed. So I never expected to have this be something that I would experience in my early 40s. So it was definitely scary. In some ways, I think having seen my mom go through it and supporting her through it made me feel better equipped to handle it. I didn't have as many questions. It was more, okay, what's this going to look like for me? But I knew the experience. I knew the journey having been by her side, but it still just felt very surreal and very like, this can't actually be what's happening. I think I was 43 at the time. I felt like it's not something that I would even have to think about at that stage of my life.
Where did you feel it in your body?
Oh, I tend to feel everything in my chest, like specifically left side. Like I have this, I tend to feel everything there or in my upper stomach. And so I think I felt it in my chest, not the side that I actually had the cancer. It's just like the place in my body where I tend to feel emotion and stress and fear.
Yes. So I was curious, could you speak to people about it, whether it was associates or clients at that time? Or was there a sense of isolation because of this expectation to put on a strong front or not to show weakness? I'm not saying that it's weakness. I'm just saying that there's perceptions in society. And I just wondered in that moment and the months that followed.
Yeah, so it was this really interesting dynamic because it's one of the things that I've learned about myself throughout this experience and this journey is that I don't have to constantly be the strong one and I don't have to constantly keep going. But I had this weird blend in the beginning of I was very transparent about what was happening, but at the same time, I also didn't stop. I just kept going. Even when I had major surgery and treatment and everything that I went through, I still worked every day. I was back at work 3 days after major surgery, right? I couldn't even shower myself. I couldn't do anything, but I was still working. And so it was, remotely, but still working. And so I was very transparent. I felt like I could speak about it with anybody, but I never stopped to consider that I could actually pause. I never stopped to actually handle it or process it, either physically or emotionally, because I'm just or had been such a go, go, go person, right? The people I worked with used to call me the Energizer Bunny. And that was just kind of how I was and how I approached things. So I just kept on going. So the first thing I did the day that I found out, which was actually New Year's Eve, 2019, I remember going to my parents' house. My husband and I had New Year's Eve plans, and we were going to go see Star Wars that night. And I'd said, we have to go tell my family. And that was the hardest thing ever, was telling my mom, knowing how scared she was going to be after what she had experienced. My dad was battling prostate cancer at the same time. So he was literally in the middle of treatments. And I did not want to have to tell my family because I knew that they would actually take it worse than I did. But I immediately did that because I felt like I needed to tell them, both for their, sake, but also for my own support system. And then the next thing I did was I immediately told my clients and the companies and my coworkers, because I knew that I was going to need their support from a practical perspective to still deliver on my commitments and the things that I needed to do while I was undergoing treatment. But other than that transparency, I really didn't stop, and I really didn't allow myself the space to actually process it.
Interesting. So were you in corporate America at that time?
Yeah, so I was consulting. So I've been a business consultant for a really long time. So I was consulting with a Fortune 10 client at the time. So I was very embedded and working with teams. I actually had a trip planned to India because I'd spent a lot of time in India. I was supposed to be back to India, I think, the week that I had my surgery. And so it did end up having an impact to a lot of the consulting commitments that I had in place.
So the reason I asked that is because I knew that, I mean, you're very successful today, but I knew a little bit from your story from the last time we spoke, and you were a hardworking, I might say ambitious in a good way, career woman. And so I just wondered if I mean, I think about not just the women in corporate America, but also the women that are in family businesses, and they are go-getters and the weight is on their shoulders and they need to produce. And then they could come across something that throws a wrench in an obstacle in their path. And then how do the people around them process it, and how do they process it? And I think you said a moment ago, in that moment, maybe you didn't process it emotionally. You were just logical and methodical about it.
Yeah, I'm a get things done. All right. So what did I say? Okay, what do I have to do next? All right, I'm gonna go to the doctor. I'm gonna get my results. As soon as I figure that out, I'll get the surgery scheduled. I'll see how long I'm gonna be out for. I'll figure out who can cover while I'm out. I went into planning mode. It's what I do, right? It's like we've got a deliverable to meet. Cool. Who's gonna help cover while I'm out for a few days? I can still do this. I understand my energy might be a little bit lower, so maybe I won't commit to the 400,000 things I would have committed to before. I'll only do 399. Right. And so it's like, but I just kept going and planning and never stopped to really think about that. I eventually ended up making it when I gave myself that time to reflect.
Interesting. So when you did tell the people around you, let's say in the business world, do you think that they were supportive because you just handled it?
Yeah, they were. They were really so supportive. So incredibly supportive. Everyone around me, from a coworker, peer perspective, they were all like, "How can we help? What can we do for you?" They actually encouraged me to take time. I just didn't. And so I didn't feel like I had any pressure to keep showing up. I had the most supportive people around me, from my peers to my clients, all the way across the board. So I do feel very fortunate in that sense. I think most people have a lot of fear about how people will react, but the reality is everyone just wants you to be healthy. They want you to do well. And sure, they're going to be worried about, well, are we still going to meet our deadline? But at the end of the day, they care about you first. And me being me, it's the first thing I said is, hey, by the way, just letting you know, this is going on, but here's how I'm handling it. Here's how I'm making sure that nothing's going to be impacted, because that was my initial approach. And they just know how I am, that I'd never let anything drop anyway. I don't think they ever really worried for themselves. They just worried for me.
That's so sweet. Thank you. Thank you for speaking into that, because I think a lot of times, if people don't know because they haven't faced it, then they don't know necessarily how to guide the conversation or how to guide the relationship, whether it's a business relationship, a social or a personal relationship. So I'm glad to hear that the people that were around you just said, we'll lean on you and you've got it covered. And so you knew that the deadlines could be on their mind, but at the same time, they were humane. So I think that's great, because again, when I look at the statistics, and also I think something for women is like heart disease is number one. Heart attacks are also up there regarding stress. And I know a lot of times women who are hardworking and dedicated and not afraid to take on executive roles and um, break through those glass ceilings also can sometimes then have this expectation that they put on themselves. I don't want to say superwoman, but they just want to be able to power through and not be perceived as quote weak if these human moments come around, because they don't want to be seen as through the lens of a stereotype. So I think my next question is, then you had to be brave in this moment, okay? And was it 3 years, 4 years, or what was it like, or what was the time frame to kind of go through the tunnel of healing and recovery? And
Yeah, it was interesting, right? So immediately I just went into, okay, this is what I'm faced with. What am I going to do about it mode? Like I said, planning. Okay, I'm going to have to have surgery. I'm going to have to recover from that. Do I want to do radiation? Do I not? What kinds of medication do I want to commit to? Do I want to go more of a natural path? What does this look like? And so I went into, okay, I have a problem. Let me solve the immediate problem at hand. But then once I got on the other side of that, that was when all of a sudden I had a lot of internal things start coming up.
Well, I was just
And
going to make the comment for a moment. You approached it like a consultant.
I did, right? It's just another problem that we have to solve. I'm an excellent problem solver. I got this. But I also think some of that for me was A, personality, right? It's just kind of what I do in life. But B, it was the fact that I had gone through it with my mom and I was currently in the middle of taking my dad for cancer treatments every week. Like I knew what to expect to some level. So I didn't have that same level of unknown or fear that I might have had I not known anything. It was more, what stage is it going to be? Am I going to have chemotherapy? Am I going to lose my hair? Like, am I going to have changes to my body? Like, it was those sorts of things that were the unknowns that were very stressful. And there were a lot of decisions around that I had to make that were very stressful. But aside from that, it was more just like, okay, problem, solve it, get through it. And so I did. And in the moment, I'm grateful I did that because it let me not get caught up in the spin and the fear and the, oh my God, am I going to die? And like all of that in that moment. But then it was afterwards where I did actually take the time to process. And I don't think I did it intentionally. I think it more just was that wake up call that kept gnawing at me until finally I realized you just had something really significant happen. You just had something really major happen. You're on the other side of the worst of it, but do you want it to come back? Or do you want to actually look at some of your life and make some changes so that you're giving yourself the best possible chance to not have this return? And so it was that, I think, space that I ended up eventually giving myself, and so much deep inner work and reflection and stuff that I did that ultimately led to so many changes and me feeling like I'm probably happier, more aligned, more fulfilled, more all of the things today than I ever would have been without that experience.
Interesting. So a moment ago, you mentioned that that there were things that came up. So I'm curious what came up.
Yeah, as far as like decisions that needed to be made or
The
like
emotional
life
processing.
choices.
Yeah, the emotional processing. Like you said, like at the very beginning, you were logical, you approached it like a consultant, but there were
Yep.
things that did come up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there was a lot that did come up. And so, right, I had a lot of changes physically because of surgery and things like that. And so that caused me to just do a lot of reflection on self and identity and all of those sorts of things too, because I don't look the same as I looked before. I felt different. I looked different. And so it caused this like internal look at myself and my own self confidence and things like that. So it brought a lot of that personal stuff up. But from a business perspective, it also brought up a lot of, am I really truly doing what I love? And what I realized was the work, yes. The where and the who I'm doing it with, no. And that was the big shift for me. I kind of lumped them all together. The work and where and how I did the work were one, but it allowed me to really reflect and separate that I could love the type of work that I do and still want to change some of the environment and some of the factors and how and where I did that work so that it was less stressful. It took less time. I didn't have to travel to India all the time and travel every single week because I was a road warrior. I literally traveled every single week. And so there's different ways that I could still make the impact that I want, that I could still leave the legacy that I want, all of those things that were important to me. I could do those in different ways that were more fulfilling, as opposed to doing those in the way that I had known and that I spent most of my time doing for 20 years up until that point.
Yeah. I'm curious. You had mentioned self-esteem, and I know that one of the things that can slow a person down from designing their legacy is limiting beliefs. So I would be curious around how did it shift the conversation in your head around self-confidence, self-esteem, and so forth?
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the decisions that I did end up making was no longer working with big Fortune 50 clients and working more with entrepreneurs and small business owners. I really wanted to be closer to the impact. I wanted to be able to really go much deeper into a business and come along and really help them to achieve the levels of growth and the scale that they wanted in their business. But what the side effect of with that came up that gets to your question is it was a very big identity shift, right? I had spent 20 years as this go-to person that you called in to transform these really big businesses, to completely transform how businesses work. Everything that I did, everything that I was known for, the person that I was, the way I thought about things, the way I approached things was very much a part of that identity. And so when I made the change, it was more just this inner turmoil or this inner almost like, who am I in this new way of working? I'm finally doing what I felt like I always wanted to do, but now I'm not the same person I was a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. So what is this? And so it was more that than anything else, I think. And as just people in general, but especially as entrepreneurs, I feel like we hit these different identity evolutions over time throughout our journey. And some of them feel really significant, and it's getting through the other side of it that I feel like is where you have your next big breakthrough or your next big up level. And that was a big identity evolution for me, is no longer being this go-to international consultant who travels the world and is brought in to, do these big, hairy transformations. And instead, it's I'm the person that you call when you have a small business and you want to simplify things and scale things. And so it just ended up being a really big shift internally.
That's lovely. And what I'm hearing is almost that it's who do I get to be? And can I trust myself to be a new identity if I'm no longer what I was once known for?
Yeah, because your value, right or wrong, we all somehow tie our value to the things that people say about us or how we're
Oh,
known or the impact that we make, right? And
so
we
that
all can
mirroring.
say, no, I don't. I, I don't do that. I value her. I'll think that. But the reality is, a lot of our value comes from what we've been told is valuable. And so, what I had always done that was seen as valuable, I now didn't do, or I did in a different way. And so, it just brought up a lot of that. No, what I do is valuable regardless of where I do it. I don't need the biggest companies in the world to tell me it's valuable for it to be valuable. I know it's valuable, and it's okay if I'm working with a brand new business, an experienced, small business, or the biggest company in the world. It doesn't matter who I'm working with. It's valuable. I'm valuable. And that's different than tying that value and that worth to what somebody else said. And in the world that I was in, right, the bigger the client you get, the bigger the transformation that you do. There's like a lot of prestige and a lot of accolades that go along with that. And I removed myself completely from that. And again, it went back to, well, who am I now if that's not how I know I'm doing the right thing or how I know I'm doing good. So it was just such an interesting evolution.
I just want to applaud your integrity around that because it can be very hard sometimes for people to walk away from that prestige and find value in new things. And there was a soundbite in there that I'll have to like find for Instagram or Twitter or something. He said something along the lines of, what we value is what other people oftentimes find valuable. And to be able to pull back from that and to have some perspective and say, is that really what I value?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we look at the covers of business magazines, Forbes, Fortune, major newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, New York Times, and so forth. And they tell us the richest people, but they don't say like, well, here's a list of those who honor their top 5 core values.
Right, exactly. It's how much money did you make? How quickly did you grow? Right? It's different types of metrics. And I think those are great. Like those are important. Nothing wrong with those. But I think if you're doing those at the expense of your own fulfillment, at your own happiness, then those aren't the right metrics to look at. I think there needs to be that more qualitative measure along with the quantitative measures where you're really looking at how fulfilled am I? Do I actually like what I'm doing? Does this fuel me, or am I just doing it for the growth or the number or the increase or the revenue or whatever that kind of arbitrary metric is?
Or the external applause. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting conversation before I move on to the next question. There's an interesting conversation these days in Western culture around having and finding success and wealth without making the sacrifice. Because up until this point, it's almost like it's been synonymous. Well, I have to sacrifice in order to have success. I have to sacrifice. And then the conversation can become, well, what if I don't have to sacrifice? What if there's a way, kind of like what you're exploring right now with the lean out method of, well, what if there's a way that I can find a new form of success and wealth without making that sacrifice? But it's a completely different way of thinking than what we've been trained in Western society, I feel.
Oh yeah, it goes against hustle culture, it goes against so many things, and that's very much what I'm passionate about. So something I talk on a lot is what I call your rich, fulfilled life. And to me, that's what it's all about. Like, why are we trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve in our business or our careers or whatever that success is? It's so that we live a rich, fulfilled life. And so we want the time and the space and the work that we love so that we're enjoying what we're doing, not so that we're trading this precious, wonderful life that we have for the promise of this amazing tomorrow. Instead, we should be enjoying and doing what we love now. And I think that's one of those things that I realized so much throughout this experience and something I'm just so passionate about helping other people with now, because you're absolutely right. I see everybody thinking that today has to be this sacrifice and this like hustle and grind and all of these things, and not to minimize the amount of work that goes into business. It is absolutely hard work. It is, but there are ways that you can do it that are a lot different than I think what's portrayed. And you can do it in a way that's rich and fulfilling instead of in a way that's draining and just something that you don't enjoy.
Yeah, I actually I have a sister, and she at one time worked for, I think it's one of the big six consulting firms. And basically the quote on the inside of the firm was that they kill their people. And what she meant by that is the 60, 70, 80 hour weeks. Yeah, but that's not talked about on the outside in the regular world.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I've been in companies before where they would look at utilization per person, like how much money did each person really make them based on how much they worked. So if I worked 80 hours and you worked 40 hours, actually I was making the company way more money than you were because I was working twice as much. So they rewarded that internally and they absolutely tracked that. And you knew internally that it was the internal game. So people would try to work more and more and more because everybody else, oh, well, that person's working 70 hours. So they're going to see them as more valuable. I need to work 80. And that's the internal game that goes on a lot of times in these big companies that they absolutely do not talk about publicly.
Yeah, but I wanted to bring it up because I just think that with the landscape today, given COVID, and I'm not going to get into that discussion right now because there's such diverse opinions about that. But I think that that society has seen an increased public consciousness or awareness around health, and what are we making these sacrifices for? So I just wanted to say kudos for questioning the norm of regarding asking yourself and your clients today the why question of, well, why do you pick that? Why are you choosing that? Why does that matter? Because I think a lot of times people graduate from college, university, their MBA program, et cetera, or even if they don't, and they just go straight into that hustle culture, they don't even think to question, well, why am I giving 40 to 80 hours a week? What is it that they're chasing so hard? Are they feeding the greed? Are they feeding their soul? And can they feed both or feed, neither? I mean, again, that's where that awareness and that personal agency comes in. Do you have anything else you'd like to share on that subject?
I do, just because I think it's a innocent conditioning, but it's a conditioning that happens, right? So if you go into the corporate space, and let's assume you go into one of the companies like the ones that we're talking about. I know there's some really incredible companies and a lot of great changes that are being made, but let's assume that you're going into one of those companies that does reward you working really, really hard. Well, a lot of times it's not like you're stopping to think, oh, I'm working 80 hours this week. Oh, I'm sacrificing this thing. That's just the culture of the environment that you're in. And you get rewarded for doing that. So you learn and are conditioned to think that you need to do more of that because that's what they value. That's how you are valuable to them. So you work more and you work harder. And most people just don't stop and think, I'm working too much. I'm trading my personal life for my career.
Or my
And I think the
balance?
same is true, yeah, in entrepreneurship, right? You just all costs, who needs sleep? You work around the clock. And it's like there's all of these things that are pushed out, and you're doing what the people around you are doing. You're being rewarded the way the people around you are rewarded. So you're thinking you're doing the right thing. And most people don't pause to consider. And the beautiful thing that I think did come out of a lot of the changes in these past few years is people are waking up to it a little bit, and they're at least pausing to consider. Like, you can still make the conscious decision that you're going into a season of your career, of your business, where you're going to be working more than you would have before. I think that's fine. We all have different seasons where our focus is in different places. But I think the important thing is people are being intentional. They're being aware. They're making the decision as opposed to it just being how they're conditioned and never stopping to question it.
Yeah. So I just think I just want to share for a moment. I think it's so powerful you shared that, because you were in a setting that was, I would opine, a public company without like digging into your resume. Okay.
Mhm.
So if I transition it for a moment into, like, let's say a family business, I think it's equally as difficult, if not perhaps harder in some ways, regarding the separation between the family and the business. But still, when you go into that culture and that is the water that you end up swimming in, it's very hard to pull back unless that, what we call the major health scare or that wake up call shows up. And then the individual can say, well, why am I putting all this pressure on my shoulders? And is it truly the intention of those around me? Or are we all just kind of unconscious walking in and doing this another year, another decade, without realizing that maybe we could do it differently? And yeah, yeah. Okay, so let me ask you the next question, which is, what was or is it like to hear others, let's say, complain about the mundane things when you had to overcome the unknown?
It's interesting because I don't think I ever looked at anything different in that moment. Like, it wasn't like somebody said something and I was like, "Oh, well, that's so silly to be worried about when I'm over here worrying about this." I don't think I ever had that reaction, but in general, I get really, I don't know what the right word is, but I just think it is such a waste to spend our time on mundane things. I feel like this life is so precious and this time that we have is so precious. And I've always felt this way, even before being faced with the very real possibility of no longer continuing it, right? I've kind of always felt that I just don't think that there's time and space for drama and for complaining and for excuses and for everything. I think that we have to take responsibility over our current environment and situations, and that we get to choose how we react and what bothers us and what we let affect us and what we don't. And I just think that there's really no space for mundane. That's me. Like, I want to live full out, and I have always felt that way. I just value different things differently now. So I don't think that cancer actually impacted that thought process any, but just in general, I just feel like if you're around people all the time who talk about really mundane things and complain, and there's drama and a whole lot of stuff, find some different people to hang around.
That's honest. That's beautiful. Yeah. I just wondered if it made you perhaps feel alone at that moment, or if you had an expanded compassion when they would complain about, the line at the Starbucks, or not getting the right Airbnb, or the luxury car model was not in stock at the Mercedes-Benz dealership or something. If you just had that expanded compassion for them, or if it was like you were just glowing in your own newfound growth, that it was like, and it was water off the duck's back.
Yeah, I think I just wasn't even, I don't even
Noticing.
think it registered.
Okay, good, good, cool. Okay. Do you feel as if this is a second chance at life?
I do. I feel like I've lived a really great life. I feel like there's been lots of things that if I had a time machine, I'd go back and do over. Don't get me wrong, not every moment has been wonderful. But one thing that I have always really valued is experiences. I have always valued experiences over things. And I have built a life based on rich experiences. That's just something that's always been really important to me. And so I
What are
love that
some of
I've
those rich
done that.
experiences?
What's that?
What are some of those rich experiences?
Oh my gosh. So probably one of the most amazing experiences I had is I actually went and spent a week on Necker Island, which,
Oh,
if you
with
don't know,
Branson.
Yeah, Richard
Okay.
Branson's Private
Okay.
Island.
Okay.
I got to spend a week with him, which was incredible, getting to ask him questions and hear how he thinks, and just being inside the mind of a serial entrepreneur in that way, who runs his businesses and approaches things in a way that I really admire. So that in and of itself was really great. But just being there in that environment on that island and just being surrounded by such beauty and just such amazing luxury and nature and just everything. It was such an incredible experience. It was like one of those deeply introspective and just completely memorable, will never forget experiences of my lifetime. But one of the other ones, like that's an extreme, but I love music. I love music and I love concerts. And I will always make time to go see Bret Michaels in concert. I just saw him this past week. It was incredible. I've seen him hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and I will continue to do so. It's just, to me, it's about the experience. Nothing could take the smile off my face for days after that concert. I'm still smiling about it, and it was a week ago. And so it's like, I just always look for those types of experiences.
That's lovely. I have no idea who Bret Michaels is. Was that Guns N' Roses?
Lead singer of Poison.
Well, that's right. Okay, I remembered it a little bit from the 80s. I just wasn't sure.
Yep.
Okay. What That's beautiful. That's beautiful. What might you have done differently looking back now?
Well, I wouldn't have waited so long to shift. So, something that I've done for, I don't even know now, probably 15 to 20 years or so, is while I've been consulting with corporate clients or working as an employee inside corporations, I kind of ebbed and flowed between being a consultant, working for other companies, having my own consulting company, and being an employee. Throughout all of that, I've always worked with small businesses and entrepreneurs on the side. I've always done kind of like my 20% with the people that I really wanted to work with. And I always told myself that I would wait until, and the until changed all the time, until I made a certain amount of money, until I had a certain amount in retirement, until I was going to leave and make the change to work exclusively with entrepreneurs and small business owners, which I knew I always wanted to do. But it wasn't until I took that time to reflect, to realize just how unfulfilling and stressful the environments that I had been in were, and the fact that I wanted to make that change right that second. And I can't help but think, what if I had just made that decision from the beginning? What if I only ever worked with small business owners and entrepreneurs and never worked with corporate clients? What if I had approached it that way? That we get to this point in our life because of the experiences that we've had, the things that we've done. So I probably wouldn't appreciate what I have now had I not, worked in those environments for so long to appreciate it. So I don't think I'd actually change anything, but it does make me question, why didn't I do it sooner? How important was it really to wait for all those things that I needed to have in place, that at the end of the day, I didn't have in place when I left anyway? I just decided it was time. And so I could have made that decision years prior.
That is very, very honest. Thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of the times people wait for until everything's perfect.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was waiting for perfect. Perfect wasn't coming. I just left.
Thank you for the honesty. That's because I think a lot of times people they will procrastinate, and they don't necessarily understand why. And a part of it could be not just perfection, but it could be the sense of safety of when it's safe enough. And then there are moments when, if somebody's backed into the corner, it's not necessarily a matter of safety. It's just like, okay, it's now or never, and they don't have choices A, B, C, and D.
Yep. Yeah, it was more of that very internal, like, now is the time. You do not wait any longer. If you wait any longer, it's going to be years. You make this decision now. And so it was very much it wasn't now or never. It was just that now was the time and there was no more delaying.
Yeah, very cool. How did cancer, overcoming and healing from it, change your perspective of documenting your life, values, identity, preferences, your roots? And roots, I mean by like ancestry, lineage, etc., or anything else. And it's because I know that you like journals and art.
I do. I love journaling. And one of the things that this brought me back to is when I was younger, I used to journal a lot. Writing has always been a very big piece of what I've done and how I feel like I've grown as a just human in general. And I got away from it over the years. I got really busy. I worked too much, right? All of those things. And I stopped journaling. And I think part of everything that we've talked about so far on this episode, sharing what I've learned and what I've gone through, all of that has come through journaling. It has come through the act of taking the time to document. When I did go to Necker Island, which I shared, which was one of those gifts to myself after my treatments, when I had done that, I actually shared that whole experience. I did a live cast the whole time that I was there. And that's not something I ever normally would have done. But it's just, I don't know that anybody other than me and those close to me will ever see any of it necessarily, but I felt the need to get it all out, get it all down, process, and to share in a lot of ways that I hadn't in the past.
Very cool. In terms of values, how do you feel? And I know this question's not on the list. How do you feel you've lived into your values kind of since you decided to start working more with small businesses and entrepreneurs?
It's interesting, right? Because the things that I value in general, it's not so much that the values shifted, it's that my realization of those values has shifted. I feel like I compromise too much. I let too much go. It's like, yeah, I mean, I value this, but I'll get to it eventually. Whereas now I feel like I'm fully living in my values. Like I shared with you, rich, fulfilled life. That is one of my core values. Inspired action is one of my core values, right? It's, I don't want to just do something for the sake of doing it. I want to take inspired action because it's the right thing to do. I'm excited to do it. It's directionally going to take me where I want to go with this amazing life, right? And so it's, I feel like it's just made me more aware of them, and it's made me more use them as almost decisioning criteria for the things I say yes to and the things I say no to. Whereas before it was almost like, yeah, I value it, but I'll get to it. Now it's like, no, I'm here. I don't know how long I'm here. I am going to fully live what's most important to me right now and every day.
Very cool. And in terms of preferences, I know that's kind of vague, but um, maybe I could bring up lineage or roots or something. Is there anything like that finally you went and you did that trip to Europe, or you did that voyage somewhere, or a pre-designed experience? I'm just checking in.
No, I did not yet, although I do, most of my family's from Italy, and
Okay.
I would really like to get there and visit. But what I just did, which I'm really excited, it's my parents do not know this yet, but they will this weekend. I just bought them the ancestry kits so that they could do their DNA profiles and stuff. And I'm kind of curious myself, but more I just have both of them having gone through cancer, both of them having gone through a lot of health challenges. I think it's something that will give them a really incredible and fun project. My dad, especially, who geeks out on this kind of stuff, like I just am excited for them to be able to do it. And I'm curious, of course, to see what ends up coming of it. But I think it'll be kind of fun. And I'm sure that it will end up informing some great trips and some great experiences in the future either. But I can't wait to give them that gift and see what that ends up doing for them over these next couple months.
That is so sweet. That is really sweet. Um, just it just highlights like almost like a shared purpose in terms of like a collective legacy. Beautiful. Okay. What would you like? And I may have asked you this last time, but I'm going to ask it again. What would you like in your hardcover coffee table book to pass on to your loved ones or beneficiaries regarding your holistic legacy?
I mean, really, at the end of the day, when I think about legacy, it's about impact. It's about the impact that we feel called to make and that we want to make. And I don't think it's the impact that we make after we're gone. I think it's the impact that we make while we're here, right? And so I think it's great if you're still making impact after you're gone, but it's really about the impact we're making in this lifetime and truly living that rich, fulfilled life, truly feeling happy in the moment, truly doing what you want to do. And so I think if I were looking at my hardcover book, it would be you get to design this life however you want it. You get to choose the experiences that you include and the ones that you exclude. And so I think it would just be kind of almost, I hate to use the word permission because nobody needs permission, but I feel like it doesn't change the fact that people wait for permission. But it's almost permission to do what you really want and to design and architect your life, your business, your career, whatever that is, the way that you want to. There is no one and only one way to do it. And there is no one and only one way to leave a legacy. I think it's a matter of getting clear on what does that mean to you? What do you want that to be? And giving yourself the permission to go after what you really want instead of what you feel like you have to or should do.
That's just so lovely. And I appreciate that you've spoken to this idea of like consent or permission, because I think a lot of times with schooling growing up, whether it's public or private schooling, you have to raise your hand to go to the washroom or the bathroom, okay? And the to get the permission to go to the locker. And then it's so much like in the society and life and rules and policy, public policy, etc. Just feels like there's so much we have to be granted permission for. So thank you for speaking into that, because again, limiting beliefs are the number one thing that hold a person back from designing, defining, developing, executing a legacy. Because there's this idea of, well, what if somebody doesn't like it? Or who am I to do this? And well, someone else needs to go first. And then they miss these moments until, like you had said, it's almost like to this moment of like, well, what if it's too late? It's now or never. And so, yeah, some people don't have to wait for that wake up call. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, leverage mine as your wake up call. Here you go, right? Here's you have full permission to never experience a health scare, to never have to have something traumatic happen, and to just simply listen to somebody else who has lived it and use that as your wake up call to make the changes that you want to make.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you want more of? Whether that thing was tangible or emotional in terms of support or joy. And that could have been during or after.
So what's really interesting is when I was going through my treatments was right when COVID hit. And as a result, I actually couldn't be with anybody. And so that was really hard for me. I was with my parents through all their treatment, and I shouldn't say nobody. I had select people, my husband included, who were there for me, which was really great, but he couldn't even come with me. I had to go to every treatment myself, because it was the point in time when you can't bring anybody with you into a doctor's office. You can't do anything. So I very much experienced a lot of the healing and a lot of the journey on my own. We had to do things over Zoom. My parents learned Zoom. They never knew how to Zoom before, but they learned Zoom over that experience, which was great and kind of fun. But we didn't get to do a lot together, and I didn't get to experience a lot of that with people, and never really got to fully experience the celebration of coming out the other side of it, because all of it happened when everyone was on lockdown. So I think, in an ideal world, if I had to experience this again, it would have been really great to have had my family by my side and my friends by my side in a way that just simply wasn't possible because of the state of the world at the time that all of it was happening.
Yeah. So it's almost like you went through it in a bubble. Oh, did it freeze?
I did, so it all feels like it never happened because it was so in a bubble.
Yeah. Would you say that one more time it froze by accident?
Oh yeah, so it was very much in a bubble, and in some cases, it almost feels like it didn't happen because it was in such a bubble. I know
Oh,
when my mom finished her treatments, we threw a big party for her, and the whole family got together and everything. And my treatments ended, and it was just kind of like, okay, another day back to work, because I'm back to work virtually, of course, because that was all that we could do. But there was no acknowledgement. There's so many people who don't even know that I ever went through cancer, and that's fine. It's not a big piece of what I talk about normally, but it was such a isolated and isolating in a lot of ways experience that sometimes it almost feels like it never happened.
interesting. So it's almost like I wonder if it was like Groundhog Day, and then it was like it was done, and then it was like, okay, well then I just go on to tomorrow, and it was almost like a dream or something.
Completely and entirely. Yep.
Oh, interesting. Do you think that you had to grow in terms of your internal strengths of like, I got this? And even though I would think as a businesswoman traveling by yourself to India and other countries, you almost would have also had to build up internal skills of like, okay, I got to board that airplane alone and be my own person and go into that boardroom alone.
Yeah, I've always been fiercely independent. And so I think that that served me well throughout this experience. But, I mean, when we're sick, we always want those around us that we love. I mean, maybe that's just me, but still to this day, when I'm sick, I want my mom, right? I'm in my late 40s and I still want my mom when I'm sick, right? It's just kind of life. And so it was just different going through an experience like that alone. Whereas I'm so comfortable being independent and being alone in so many other experiences. That was a place where I was less comfortable alone, but had to get comfortable pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for being so transparent with that. What makes you human?
Oh gosh. I mean, honestly, I think that being human is just the freedom of choice. It's going back to what I talked about with the coffee table book, right? We get to choose. We get to choose what we let in. We get to choose what we pay no attention to. We get to choose the experiences that we have. I think that that intentionality and that choice is what makes us human and what makes our human experience what it is. So might as well make it as amazing and magical as you can.
That's lovely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing the human side of yourself. I know that in many of the podcasts you focus strictly mostly on the business, the entrepreneurship, how to lean out and be efficient. And I know that today with the economy and inflation, people are definitely interested in that subject. But I think there's also a human side that people are craving because again, when we found ourselves so isolated the last few years, people kind of just wanted to reach across the aisle, even if it was virtually, and check in and realize the similarities that we all share, not just, what might make us different. And even in today's society, that can feel a little bit, divided, whether it's politically or some of those superficial reasons. And yet people can be so passionate about that. But I think at the end of the day, people also want connection and to know, gosh, Krista, if you made it through that journey and I'm at the start of it, yeah, share your cliff notes with me because that could give some hope.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I've actually never talked about it like this on a podcast before, and I've done hundreds of podcast interviews. It's always strategy and business and how to lean out and get time back and all the things. So this was kind of a fun experience, and I hope for all of you listening, there's some good things that you're able to introduce into your lives or businesses or careers as a result.
Thank you. Thank you. I was actually just being transparent right now. I was actually scared to ask because sometimes I'm not sure how much do I pry. Like I can pry with clients sometimes, but there's still always that rule like, well, how much do I push? Because sometimes people want to be asked and they're just waiting. And other times it's like, gosh, you could be like asking a woman her age, it's like how could Angelina go there?
Oh gosh, I am so transparent. Like, ask me anything. I don't care. Whatever you want to know. The way I see it is I already lived it. I already experienced it or I already thought it. If it in some way inspires you to do something different, great. If it inspires you to not do something and you're like, I am never doing what she did, that's great too. Right. Whatever it is, I think that we're too precious about things sometimes. And so I think push, ask, do, whatever it is, go for it.
Yeah.
That's kind of my take.
And also to share the notes because I think there's a lot of next gen, including young ladies out there that might not know if they walk into one of those big six firms or they're going to walk into a corporate setting, what might be expected of them. And yeah, and if they don't have the opportunity to find a mentor, maybe they can check out a podcast and hear, what I call that inside track or the cliff notes to know what it is they need to know. Because a lot of times HR doesn't tell us everything we need to know.
Oh, not at all. And the thing is, I think there's so many misperceptions, right? There's so many misperceptions about those environments. And it doesn't matter how big of a company it is, it doesn't matter the type of business, it's still run by other humans. And humans are very compassionate by nature. And so, what humans don't usually like is excuses, but humans are very compassionate. So, I think if you are putting their interest, you're showing that you're thinking through impacts of things, you're showing things, you can share almost anything. And people are always going to be compassionate and always want the best for one another. They just don't want that at the expense of the business itself. And so, I think depending on how things are positioned, it's people have way more opportunity to be really transparent and to be really vulnerable and to be a lot of those things than a lot of times they think they are. And it's just people. It's people behind the companies who ultimately want to see other people successful usually.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for speaking so deeply and openly. And I know we set the intention at the very beginning of, what if you could make the changes in your life today without having to face the major health scare wake up call. And so I appreciate that you have spoken into your experience. And I will just close us out with my paragraph, unless you have a website you would like to share or any other closing thoughts.
Yeah, if you want to hear about business strategy, you can find my podcast at leanoutpodcast.com or my website at leanoutmethod.com. But otherwise, if you just more kind of want the inner workings of my brain and my life, that is pretty much what you'd find over on Instagram, which is my name, Crista Grasso.
Very lovely. And I'll make sure I include those links in the show notes and the description. So, okay, so I am just going to close us out, and I will thank you once again, Crista. And I would like to edify her podcast. So if anyone out there would like an amazing business podcast, please check out Crista. She definitely delivers with every episode. Okay, so I am just going to read this out. So in closing, I'm Angelina Carlton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners out there, there can never be enough education or preparation in the mood or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself a new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. So if you are checking us out on Apple Podcasts, please remember to rate and review. Or if you're listening on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe or comment if you so choose. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And thank you so much, Crista, for speaking into your legacy.